We, of course, are Společnost pro vědy a umění, STU, Czechoslovak Society of Arts and Sciences, New York chapter. My name is Chris Harwood, and I'm president of the New York chapter. And as usual, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Susanna Hossi, who's handling the technical side. And so follow us on Facebook, check out our website, and also check out the website of the Bohemian Benevolent and Literary Association, whose generous sponsorship makes all of our programming possible. We also invite you to come check out our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. We're like 3 or 4 names away, 3 or 4 subscribers away from having our own named channel so we can use. And please make a note in your calendar if you haven't already. For Thursday, April 29th, we're going to have a very extraordinary event. For something like 10 hours, we are going to read the entire first volume of The Good Soldier Švejk in English translation on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the publication of the first part. And we've got a fantastic lineup of scholars and actors and other fans of Švejk who are going to read in succession. So now I would like to introduce today's speaker, and that is Dr. Helena Čapková, who is a Czech curator, researcher based in Tokyo and Kyoto, Japan. And this is a wonderful thing, of course. There's a lot that sucks about the pandemic and not being able to do our events in person, but going on to Zoom has allowed us to really reach out and go global. And so our speaker is checking in from Japan today. And she is a professor of art history at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. And she studied transnational visual culture and Japanese studies, first in Prague and then in London. And as a PhD candidate, she collaborated on international and interdisciplinary research projects, such as Forgotten Japonisme, that's a project from 2007 to 2010. And later on the project Enchanted Modernities, Theosophy, Modernism, and the Arts, circa 1875 to 1960. That was a project that ran from 2013 to 2015. Since around 2010, she's published and lectured extensively on the specific nature of Japanese modernism and avant-garde, which she looks at as an inherent part of art history that is traditionally perceived as Western. Her publications on this topic include Believe in Socialism, the architect Bedřich Feuerstein and his perspective on modern Japan and architecture, that's from 2016, and also Careless Shell, Transnational Exploration of Czechoslovak and Japanese Surrealism from 2015. In 2017, she designed a series about the architect Antonín Raymond, her topic for this evening, at the Tokyo Czech Center. This very successful series led to the book Antonín Raymond in Japan, 1948 to 1976, which she edited along with the architect Kitazawa. And this was published in October of 2019 in a bilingual Japanese-Czech edition. And very fortunately, we'll be able to look forward to the English edition coming out in fall of 2021. So please, all of you, welcome Dr. Helena Čapková, who's going to tell us about this fascinating figure, Mr. Raymond.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for your kind introduction. I hope everybody can hear me well. I am indeed talking to you from Kyoto. And Kyoto is a beautiful city in the valley surrounded by mountains, which is indeed beautiful, but it's very difficult in terms of Wi-Fi connection. It's legendarily very bad. So I'm very sorry if I will be cutting off or some other problems will appear. I'm sure my colleagues, dear Susanna or Chris, will let me know, but hopefully we will not have such problems. The talk today will have roughly 3 parts. There will be quite extensive biographical sketch. I believe this is something interesting to the members. So maybe I should give a little warning that there will be maybe less architecture today and a little bit more about Raymond himself and his exciting, interesting life story. Still, of course, we will talk about architecture. We can't do without it. The biographical sketch will have 3 parts. one, Antonin Raymond in Czech, or then Bohemia, then his American beginnings, let's say, and then the later period when he divided his time between Japan and America. In about middle of my talk, we will speculate and think about why he was so successful. This is something extraordinary about Antonin Raymond. Scholars speculate about his style, about his architecture, about how much and to what extent he contributed to international modernism. But the fact is that there is no other foreign architect that would be as successful in Japan as Raymond. He built hundreds of projects there. And that is one great achievement, but also to succeed in such a complicated cultural environment like Japan is incredibly difficult. And it is significant that he managed. And still today, many architects ask me why. You know, we want to be as successful as Raymond here now today. How shall we go about it? So it's a pressing issue, and we will think about that a little bit. And in the last part, I would like to introduce to you the book project that we've recently finalized. It's already 2 years, it feels like yesterday. That is going to be then the end of my talk, I suppose. And there will be questions and answers at the very end as well. So Antonin Raymond, as I'm sure many of you encountered the name, maybe some of you even met him as he left us in the 1970s. He went by few names, in fact. Antonín Raymond, spelled German way. Then he sometimes used this Antonín Raymond, spelled in Czech way, in Czech. And then, of course, as American citizen that he became, he adopted the most established label brand, Antonin Raymond, new name. And this threefold existence is quite significant because it also illustrates quite a complex life passage that he had. But we can clarify that the German Raymond was his official name. The Raymond, Czech spelled, he uses later on. I should say that especially for the Czech basis, Czech part of this talk, I benefited greatly from his autobiography. That is an excellent resource. I recommend it to you, but of course it's written by the master himself, so it needs to be treated as well quite critically. Antonin Raymond was born to a Jewish family in Kladno, which is located fairly near Prague in Western Bohemia. He insisted in his autobiography that he was of a peasant stock. Yeah, I suspect he started as such slightly romantic mythology about himself, you know, coming from this rural pastoral background from Bohemia. He definitely enjoyed spending time with his grandparents in a Renchov, Kladno suburbia these days, but he was definitely quite middle class. The family was, and his father Alois was a salesman. You can see him in the middle with Raymond's mother, and then you can see him in the 1930s as well. Raymond grew up in this bourgeois environment in Kladno with 5 siblings. He had 2 older sisters, Elsa and Irma, and he had 3 younger brothers, and you can see 2 of them here. You can see František, you can see Victor, and there was also brother Egon. So they were quite a large family. Raymond had a very kind and very warm relationship with his father, especially, and with the siblings. And they as well were motivations for him to keep contact with Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, all the way throughout his career. Very sadly and tragically, the siblings, Father Alois dies before the Second World War, but the siblings, we can conclude, although again in autobiography we'll find slightly different information. Again, I think this is a part of this mythology that I already hinted at, but they were killed by the Nazi regime, some members of the family in the concentration camp. And of course, this is already history of 1930s and mainly 40s. And I can tell you that Antonín Raymond by then had an extensive network among politicians, diplomats, and he tried very hard to save his family, and he was devastated that he didn't succeed. But this kind of connection with Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, also after the war, where the family was not there anymore for him, was an ongoing project for Raymond. He always tried to be somewhat connected to his homeland, with mild success, I would say. I will tell you about it, what the connections were. But unfortunately, this is Raymond's house in Kladno. This is Kladno main square. This is a kind of illustration of this kind of rural activities that he so much enjoyed, or so he portrayed it in his book. But that was to end for him. Unfortunately, the sales didn't go that well for Raymond's father. The family, his mother also died. The father married another woman, and the family relocated to Prague. And as much as young Raymond loved Prague, he loved the architecture, he became very good at sketching the architectural details that he as well could see in Prague. He wasn't a happy young man. He enrolled, he started studying at the Czech Technical University. That's what it's called now. He apparently already then was an admirer of Frank Lloyd Wright, with whom he later worked. But, and now we are in about 1907, 1908, yeah, chronologically. This is how he puts it in his book. He felt he needs to follow his star. Yeah, he had to follow his star. He was, and he thought, and this is also something that we can see throughout his life. And we can see it, I should say, because we are lucky that we have quite a lot of correspondence that he wrote to his wife, to his friends, to his company members. So there is quite a lot of evidence we can work with. And so he always kind of have this feeling following the star that he can do better. You know, he's meant to do something else. Yeah. And so he decided, and he did quite a daring thing. He became a member of the Students of Architecture Club, which still exists today. It's an important students' body in the Czech Technical University. And he became a treasurer of this club. And he chose quite a good timing, apparently, after the club's ball, and where the money for the tickets were all in, and basically took all the money. And the money he took was apparently 5,000 Austrian crowns at the time. And he took it and he went south to Trieste, and he worked. He already presented himself as a draftsman, as an architect, although he had 2 years of study under his belt. But he was very talented. He was very talented artistically. He was a apparently good draftsman. And he managed to get some work. He boarded a ship and he set for America. This 5,000 Austrian crowns were about 1,000 US dollars, apparently. And that act, although he was, we know that straight away, he wrote a letter to his friends from the club, apologizing and explaining himself, reassuring them that he will return the money back. But of course, they were very upset with him. And so by doing that, of course, he opened the door for himself. Yeah, taking the money from the club. He created a group of architects, his contemporaries, that created a group of people that were not exactly welcoming of him being successful in Czechoslovakia later on. But because Raymond, when he returned to Czechoslovakia, then again in the mid-1920s, was already quite established then, he sort of jumped over this group of his fellow, his contemporaries, and was very attractive to slightly younger generation of architects. So he managed to attract certain, maybe a little different crowd. When I'm talking about this infamous defraudation, I should also say that Raymond indeed did return the money back. A little bit later, he was already in Japan then, and he apparently returned also much more than he actually did take. And yes, he headed, as I said, to America, to New York. And it is quite interesting that although he was sort of running away from Bohemia, when he enters the States, what he does is that he immediately seeks the Czech quarter. He sometimes calls it in the book Czech ghetto, Sokol, on the East 72nd Street. And he found fellow Bohemians. And it was through one of them who went by the name Rockhart, originally in Czech Roháč. He introduced him to the manager at the Cass Gilbert office. And this is how he got the job as a draftsman in this office that was at that time working on this very famous building. Of course, everybody, I'm sure, who is listening knows the Woolworth building. And he was working tirelessly for that office. He struggled, but he found himself a good network of these Bohemian friends. I should also say that at that time, he apparently didn't have much English. That was definitely the reason why he was seeking this Czech network. But he was talented also in terms of languages. He spoke French and German. He, of course, learned English, and he spoke also some Japanese, although apparently not as fluently as, for example, then later his wife. He started having quite a rich social life. He meets some of the artists. Firstly, these are Czechs and they are musicians. I will name a few because maybe you will know them. He knew famous Jan Kubelík. He knew Ondříčeks, who were apparently also musicians, and Vašín, another cellist. So this would be, and these people are apparently here. Unfortunately, this photograph is not specifically described, so I'm not sure who is who, but this is Raymond here, but this is the group of Czechs who Raymond invited to inspect the site, the building site of the Woolworths building. So he would have these circles, and he would also starting infiltrating communities of painters. He joined some of it, and he started moving to a direction that he actually wanted to be an artist. So he had this short period that he saw that he will not become an architect after all, and that he will become a painter, maybe a sculptor later on. And also he decided to go to Europe. When you see this kind of white rectangular, this is a set. These are 2 pages from our book that I will be talking about later. This is also quite rare because the Antonin Raymond's free work, in, paintings, etc., are still not very well documented. And what we are looking at is also from the collection of Kitazawa Koichi, who collaborated with me on this project and who also gave us his perspective, his memories of his boss, Antonín Raymond. And he also was very kind to let us use images from his collection. So yes, Antonin Raymond thinking he will be an artist. He changed his mind, and on the ship back, returning back to New York, kind of starting again, but of course already with network in place, he meets his ultimate friend, his partner, his wife, his inspiration, Noémie Raymond. When I was telling you that we should also be asking this question, why Raymond was so successful, definitely one of the answers would be that because he had Noémie. She was extremely talented artist. She was trained as designer. She studied at Teachers College. She also took courses in Paris. She was incredibly creative. She was French, but grew up in New York. She had a great network of friends, artists as well, that was very important to Raymond in this time before and during the First World War. After all, it was her connections that led the young couple to work with Frank Lloyd Wright in Taliesin. So this is just one more slide with Noémie Raymond's work. And here we can see them in Taliesin on the left. The work with Frank Lloyd Wright was turning point for Raymond. He worked with somebody he respected. He was also already getting some recognition. Yet it must be said that probably also working with Wright was quite traumatic. My colleague and friend Ladislav Jackson just wrote a piece about this based on the correspondence between Noémie Raymond, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Antonin Raymond. So it was a intense relationship, artistic relationship, but very important for Raymond. And not only that, here in Taliesin, he's working hard, he's learning, but later, as we all probably know, he gets the offer to join Wright in Japan, and that of course is a groundbreaking moment for him and his career. However, in 1917 he is drafted, he's an American citizen. He is very proud about that. These are some of the photographs from his, if I may say, career, well, his service really in the First World War. Again, we have very interesting correspondence regarding to this, because initially Raymond was supposed to be conducting his service as engineer. So he did it for a while, apparently, but he felt, again, as I told you before, he always felt he could and he should do better, you know, that he has all these skills and he can offer much more. So he actually kind of, by writing letters and so on, he said, you know, I know all these languages, I'm European, I can be so much more useful to you. And he managed, he eventually became a part of American intelligence service. He worked with, at that time, he was still Captain Emanuel Voska, kind of a, in the Czech context, a military hero. And he was stationed in France and Switzerland. And he was working together with also Bohemians who became part of the Czechoslovak legions, the kind of proto-network fighting force that really, as we all know, was at the beginning of the Czechoslovak Republic. So the photo on the right is already from that period, from Paris, where the provisionary government of Czechoslovakia was being formed. So here again, he gathered a fantastic network of friends, people. He befriended some of the legionaries. One of his very good friends was Vladimír Vaněk, who was a diplomat in Italy and Sweden, and so on. So the Czech connection was stronger. 1919 is the year when the couple received the offer and they left for Japan. You can see this image here with Raymond and Frank Lloyd Wright is much later, but I thought it kind of emotionally really well expresses the kind of tense yet relationship probably full of admiration between the two architects. Here I'm showing you, this is what Imperial Hotel looked like. It was an established institution in the center of Tokyo, which needed an update, and it was demolished. And this fantastic construction was put in place by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it truly became iconic. It was a center of international exchange. It was a fashionable place to spend time. And also because it survived the devastating earthquake of 1923 on the 1st of September, it became this kind of testimony to great architecture that survives such a tragedy. It became not only for Wright, but mainly for Raymond, a great advertisement really that he's one of the architects who could build such a fantastic but also safe, durable architecture. And that, of course, helped his career a great deal. Noémie Raymond, of course, also was a part of the team, and she did work for the hotel as well. But very soon, you can see 1921, and this is the also beginning of this project. So in 1921, Antonín Raymond opens an office in Japan, and he starts designing, building projects, big and small. This one is a rather large project for the Tokyo Christian Women's College that is still standing in Tokyo today. I live very near, in fact, to this campus. And in the 1920s, Antonín Raymond didn't run or set up the company alone. He would have a partner. He had a couple of American partners, and the company in 1921 was called American Architecture Engineering Company. And this was opened with Leon Whittaker Slack. Then he had another American partner, Alex Sykes. But gradually, not only that, he would work with not only Americans present in Japan, but also Czechoslovaks. He had very close relationship with the embassy that opened in Tokyo in 1920. I can already say that he always wanted to build a new Czechoslovak embassy building, which unfortunately didn't happen to him, although he designed it. We have some plans surviving, but he was a part of the team. Actually, his company supervised the construction of the new Czechoslovak embassy building in 1971, early 1970s. So somehow his dream came true, but not quite as he wanted it. I'm sure he wanted to be the designer of the Czech embassy in Japan. So yeah, very close ties with the diplomatic world, including Czechoslovak embassy. He was honorary consul as well, and he was quite appreciated for his work. It was recognized that he's trying to help and also employs Czechoslovaks in Japan. However, this kind of international nature of the company changes gradually. And this is, I think, the major step that Raymond took, that especially in the 1930s and in 1937, he transforms his company entirely, and it becomes a company of shareholders and majority of them are Japanese. So, and were Japanese at the time, of course. So he kind of really transforms his business, his company into a Japanese undertaking. And he also succeeded in creating a feeling of ownership in his Japanese colleagues. And this was great, wise, and sustainable step, because this is the reason why the company survived the Second World War and is active till this day. So this is really something extraordinary he did. And of course, having a company, he starts building. And one of the exciting building that he did was his own house, a tiny house in Tokyo, beautifully concreted, Reinanzaka. And not only that, the outside, the facade was exciting, but also the interior was this refined, elegant mixture of Japanese details and contemporary modern tastes. And it worked very well. Of course, Raymond used his houses, because he built a number of houses and summer houses as well, to kind of promote his work, and also promote his work with Noemi, of course, who was in charge with the interiors. The collaboration with Noemi was ongoing. There was a few years gap when Noemi was pregnant. They had one son, Jean-François, who was known as Claude. And also she spent some time in the 20s in New York. But other than that, she was the firm member of the team, and she was in charge of the interior designing. And we know it was very clear from the interviews with her assistants, because she always would have a female assistant who worked with her, that she would be a part of the process of designing a house from the beginning. And sometimes based on, meeting the clients, going to the site, she would already determine what she wanted in the house. And as such, he would impact it on actual look of the facade. So her contribution was really important. But mention a little bit about Raymond's style, and also, again, arguing some more why he was so successful, is rooted in his great admiration, passion for Japanese traditional construction and building, in fact, carpentry. So he would study it. I'm giving you here some examples what it looks like, but I'm sure we all know something about Japanese construction, building. Here in this slide, you can see that Japanese carpenters can indeed produce a fairly monumental structures, as well as delicate small structures, and of course the work in interior as well. So it's a versatile discipline. In Japanese context, most buildings were built in wood, and the craftsmanship is extraordinary. I'm sure you've seen the amazing skills of Japanese joinery, the clever and precise skill. And Raymond absolutely loved it. He would watch the carpenters, he would learn from them, he would employ them, and he would use it for creating one line within his large production. And of course, big portion of that would be in concrete, but he would have this line of creative output in wooden construction. And this would be a very successful one. He built like that, summer housing mainly. And again, as a way to promote this, to experiment as well, he would build his own houses. So this is an example of his summer house from the pre-war period. Here as well, here we already have his son, Claude. And this image, this is an interior of the pre-war summer house villa in Kitazawa, which is a mountainous resort in Japan. And you can see it has Japanese feel to it. You can see the sliding doors, for example, but also it has this very fanciful, contemporary, popular ramp. here that will be familiar from the Corbusier architecture and so on. So yes, exciting modern Japanese-American style. Also, you can see that this image was published in Czechoslovakia in a magazine or journal Volné Směry. So yes, definitely in the interwar period as well. Raymond travels widely. He visits also Europe and Prague and his family, and he gives lectures, and he tries to get some jobs there in Czechoslovakia too. Unfortunately, he doesn't succeed, but definitely he tried. And this is another example. This is Raymond's house, summer house from the post-war period, the new studio that is also still standing, and some interiors. This is again from our book, as you can see. And here maybe you can see a little bit clearer the kind of Raymond variant, how he got inspired by the Japanese carpentry. And some examples of Noemi's contributions, so you can see them here. This is again interwar period image, and Noemi Raymond's interiors, some more here, and the fantastic designs in textiles, carpets that she became actually very quite well known for. This is quite sweet image from contemporary newspaper and more textiles. Another reason for success for Raymond, other than Noemi and his energy and his drive, his ambition, was definitely his amazing ability to network. So he was a very successful networker. He was part of not only the diplomatic circles that I already mentioned, but also all sorts of clubs. Also, he played golf, of course, and he designed many golf clubs in Japan, some even still surviving today. So again, this ability was very important, because this was also the way how he could move away from this kind of international circles in Japan that would be, or that were a resource or source of most commission for companies like this. That means for construction, engineering, architecture companies run by foreigners in Japan. But by doing this networking, as well as I said, kind of making his company more Japanese, he could reach out for more diverse Japanese clients. And again, that was a very important step he made. So yes, this is a architecture office of Raymond in the 1930s. You can see Noemi is in the middle as a very center of the office. We have Antonín Raymond here. We have some more well-known members or members of the company who became later quite well-known. We have George Nakashima, who became prolific furniture designer. We have Maekawa Kunio, who became very important Japanese modernist architect. And we have also Yoshimura Junzo, who, unlike Maekawa, who left Raymond after a few years of working with him, with Yoshimura, Raymond has much longer and lasting partnership. So yes, this would be the office in the 1930s. But as I said, in 1937, the company transforms to more Japanese enterprise. The year later, very sadly, Raymond's had to leave Japan and embark on the journey back to America to spend time during the Second World War. They traveled via India, where they had a fantastic commission of the ashram in Pondicherry. I've been researching that building for a long time. Maybe if you're interested, ask me about that during the Q&A. And eventually they landed more permanently because, as I said, they were on the move, mainly Antonin. So the presence of the Raymonds in America was established, but from the Second World War onward, the architectural activity also intensifies. in the United States. The Raymonds settle near Philadelphia in the farm New Hope that they recreate, and they create for themselves this, again, Japanese-American space. They are, the company is active, but of course, Raymond also serves in the Second World War. This is evidence of his service. He worked, at the time he worked as an engineer architect, and he, among other things, for example, building infrastructures for the US Army, he designed and devised, this is what you can see on the right, test housing, basically kind of replicas or simulations of Japanese urbanscape cities, so that the Japanese army could devise most effective ways how to destroy them, basically. So this is a contribution here of Antonin Raymond to the devastating, mainly bombings of Tokyo and other cities in Japan, which is indeed very sad, but it was a service he was serving during the work, and this is during the war, and this is what he had to do. Also, he sets up a company with Ladislav Leland Rado, and the company continues being successful. The partnership and the company is, and especially when the war ends, is active in both US and Japan. In the US, they build, I will give you some examples. They build housing. This is a house in New Jersey. Connecticut. This is a very interesting document. I'm showing you now 2 pages from a brochure produced by the Raymond Rado company, and you can see the portfolio is extensive. They are building industrial buildings. They work still for the army. They build in the US and in Japan and in the region around Japan as well. Here on the bottom, you can see the variety of different projects. So hospitals, schools, community, they do kind of updating, remodeling as well. So really the list of jobs goes on. And this is to illustrate these 2 relationships I mentioned between Antonin Raymond and some of his successful collaborators, so Maekawa Kunio and one of his famous buildings, Tokyo Bunkakaikan, and Yoshimura Junzo. Maybe with looking at some of the post-war work in Japan and the kind of beautiful and very appreciated design was this one, the Reader's Digest headquarters that Antonin Raymond built in right away after the Second World War and received prize for it as well, is maybe a good background for giving you a little bit of that story. So yes, Antonin Raymond straight away after the war offers his service to General MacArthur. He becomes part of the occupation process and kind of new Japan after the war, and builds energetically. This is another project from a bit later, the Gunma Music Center, luckily still standing. And I promise you I will tell you a little bit more about the connection with Czechoslovakia at the time, which keeps going beyond the Second World War. Raymond is pondering, he still plans to build the embassy. And when we enter 1960s, he is trying to at least show his work. So he's in correspondence with few friends. He also keeps correspondence with his one-time collaborator, František Sammer, who in this time, 1950s, is very prolific architect in Czechoslovakia. And he tries at least to organize an exhibition, kind of retrospective. But that is not going to happen and for him, because the kind of major shock and kind of maybe for him the end of that long-term project to be visible in Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, is the occupation of 1968. He learns about it from an article written by Dr. Karel Huyer that was published in Chattanooga Times and was called something Open Letter to a Soviet Scientist. And he was absolutely devastated. And he wrote a letter to Huyer's wife. He wrote many letters to all sorts of journalists that they need to write about what happened in Czechoslovakia. And yes, he sees it as a great damage, tragedy to his nation. So, as I said, the activity to organize anything in Prague cools down, but some of the correspondence still continues, and he's asked to, for example, help the Czech pavilion in the Osaka Expo in 1970, and then, as I told you, he's also asked to facilitate the building of the Czechoslovak embassy in the early 1970s. But of course, by then, Raymond is reaching the end of his career. He eventually falls ill and he relocates to America, where he sadly passes away. So maybe now I can use a few minutes to tell you this is the last part of this talk. I hope you are all still there. So this is the opening 2 pages from our book, published, as Chris kindly said, in 2019. And we are opening it with an image of older Raymond's image that I don't think it's so well known. This is one of the contribution, I think, of this book, that we are introducing many photographs from private archives of these friends, because I say friends, collaborators, that were not necessarily published before. So one will see kind of a maybe different faces, different circumstances that of Raymond and his wife. And as I said, we started this project, or I started it with one member of Antonin Raymond's office, Mr. Tsuchiya, based on my feeling that the people that I'm working with, the collaborators, the people who remember Raymond, are getting older and older, and their memories are becoming patchier and patchier. And I didn't feel that we did record their stories well enough. So this became a pressing issue for me, and I asked the director of the Czech Center in Tokyo whether we can organize some events to capture these memories. And she said yes. At the time, there was an exhibition of Antonin Raymond work in Tokyo, so it was a good coincidence. And so we invited 3 collaborators. We chose discussion format, discussions between me, Petr Holý, my colleague, and one of the collaborators. And we chose this format because, and I'm sure you know this, I think everybody has this experience. You don't need to be a researcher for this. When you talk to your grandparents, for example, when you ask them to tell you something from the past, people tend to have their versions. They have their, stories that they tend to repeat. And I was trying to attempt to get something a little bit different from these 3 collaborators, to push them a little bit so that they can give us a little bit more detail, or maybe something that they forgotten about, and then we can recover it. So I always met with them. We went through what kind of topics we will be talking about, because all these 3 people were with Raymond in different times and for different periods. So for each of them, there were maybe different projects that were important. And so we set it up. I prepared a PowerPoint with the images like you see here, and then we just talk. I ask questions, and it was, I think, very enjoyable as well, and quite exciting. And we recorded it all, and this became the base for the book. Very fortunately, when we conducted the 3rd, I believe, event, maybe to each of the events, some of the other collaborators that I didn't meet before, I didn't know, joined us, attended the event. And four of them, two couples, approached us that they would also like to talk. They would also like to share what they remember. So that's why we have four chapters, four interviews recorded in the book. That the fourth one is a collective group discussion with these two couples. So this is kind of entirely new information for any Raymond scholar. So yes, the book was published definitely with support of Czech Center in Tokyo, and it was published by the Czech publisher Aula Publishers, and I'm very grateful to them. And we are introducing 4+ stories. The first one is the viewpoint or Antonin Raymond and Noemi Raymond seen through the eyes of Yoshiko Godai, a woman that we can say spent her life with the couple, and she was almost kind of an adopted daughter of theirs. And her story is fascinating, not only that she gave us a lot of detail about how the office operated. She still remembers very clearly what it was like just after the Second World War. But she also gives us a perspective of a very young girl in Tokyo, Japanese girl who needed to navigate very tough situation. Basically, she became a breadwinner for her family, two sisters, mother and father. She bought a house, etc. It's a very exciting, a little bit sad. Definitely, it was a tough experience for her, but I think incredibly interesting. Then we have a talk by Tsunekata Naito sensei, who worked with Raymond also on this building of Gunma Music Center. He trained as a landscape architect in California. And again, he gave us all his stories. Very sadly, Naito sensei passed away in autumn. So already his memories are that little bit more precious now, as he's no longer with us. And the last planned discussion was with my co-editor, Kitazawa Koichi, who is also now a great promoter of Raymond work. And as I said, he's a collector also, or rather he has a collection of Raymond work. And this is the group discussion with the Kobayashis and Nishijimas and also Mr. Kitazawa, where we learn a great deal, especially about how the Czechoslovak embassy was built in the 1970s. And from Ms. Kobayashi, we learned a lot of detail about what it was like to work with Noemi Raymond, which was incredibly exciting. So, and lastly, we would be very grateful if you decide to support the book that I was telling you about, which we are hoping to publish in Japanese and English and make it more accessible for larger audiences. So we are using the Japanese crowdfunding site Campfire for this. And if we succeed, we will be able to publish the book and send you a copy. This would be the end of my talk, and maybe Chris can take over and moderate the discussion.
Thank you, Helena, so much for this very generous introduction to the life and work of a fascinating figure, and a figure who is really kind of perfect, I think, for SVU New York, because we're always interested in people who kind of make these transitions from one environment to another. So I would like to encourage our audience to contribute questions. I see a couple have come up in the chat, and I will turn to those. I'm going to take my moderator's prerogative to open the first question, and precisely on this matter of the kind of international identity of your subject, who is obviously of great interest to the Czechs and the Americans and the Japanese. And so obviously your work here with Professor Kitazawa is doing a huge service to preserve the legacy of Raymond. But of the scholars who went before you, documenting and analyzing Raymond's work, what is the approximate breakdown? Are they Japanese scholars, American scholars, Czech scholars?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think to this day, the most detailed scholarship that there's not great deal of it, but it exists, is in Japanese. So they are Japanese architects, because in Japanese context, architecture history is something that architects do. That's the way. So yeah, Japanese architects of the past and present as well have been writing about Raymond, different buildings, different areas of his work, and they definitely consider him as somebody of great importance for Japanese modern architecture history. So we are there in difficult situation because we are lacking translation, as we do for many things. The translation is a big issue when it comes to a little bit less prolific languages, such as maybe Japanese is. Yet, of course, Japan is a large country, and the readership and the scholarship is also considerable. For America, certainly we have still to this day extremely important work done by a collective of authors and centered around the exhibition Crafting of Modern World. I'm sure those of you who are interested in Raymond, you probably have the catalog, or would certainly recommend it to you. As I recommended the autobiography, these are two major sources in English. And the catalog is a selection of essays that look into different stages, different aspects of work of Antonin Raymond. The book was edited by Kurt Helfrich and Bill Whittaker, and Bill Whittaker especially still is a scholar and archivist who takes, and he's a keeper of the Antonin Raymond's archive in the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. So again, those of you who are interested, you can maybe go and either visit the archive or even maybe do some research there. So that, unfortunately, that would be probably the major work. Then we have some scholarship in French. My colleague Yola Gloguen, I believe she will be publishing her thesis. She published already in French, and she will do so in English too. She's an architect, and her focus is mainly the Antonin Raymond residential projects and analyzing them. Yeah, and for Czech, we still need more. I'm sure we would benefited greatly from translations of the autobiography, for example. So yes, we are catching up, I think.
Great, thanks so much for that summary of the kind of the landscape of scholarship on your subject. There was the first question that came in quite early on. I was kind of jumping the gun away, I think, because you partly answered this, but it was about which works by Raymond still exist. So obviously it's a huge body of work. You alluded in your talk to some works which are still standing. Maybe if you could just mention to us a couple major works which are still out there that maybe you didn't feature, and maybe a couple of works that you either did or not show which are no longer with us. Okay.
Yes, so definitely the work of Antonin Raymond is subjected to a great struggle that many modernist buildings have. Yeah, we are, myself kind of adjunct part of the Docomomo Japan. Docomomo, I'm sure most of you know, is an international initiative to protect or for protecting modern architecture. So yes, we are fighting. There is also fighting over keeping some of the Antonin Raymond houses, but there are still relatively many standing. It is also because his career was so long that there is and there were so many of them. So yeah, there are also still many kind of important buildings standing. Certainly, the Gunma Ongaku Center, the Gunma Music Center, is a significant post-war building that is still standing, although there is always a struggle around it. There are many people who would love to demolish it. Yes, because that's often the issue, that these buildings that were built either in Japanese context after the earthquake, or generally speaking after the post Second World War, they often stand in a very good places, yeah, because there was damage there, something, institutions, buildings were needed, and so you have this this modernist building then on a prime spot, and that what the developers want. So yes, so Gunma Ongaku Center, I would say. Then we have some iconic churches. Antonin Raymond built a whole selection of beautiful modern churches in Tokyo as well as elsewhere. And then I would also say this building in India, the Golconda, the kind of very specific dormitory / kind of yoga center that it still stands in Pondicherry. Is a fabulous building.
Lovely. So just a short comment that came in from one of our listeners, that the architect Justin Henschel apparently worked with Raymond in Tokyo. Is that something you ran across?
No, I'm writing it right down.
If I may add, this is George Hamner. Hello, everybody. For Helena, Justin is an incredible source of memories and information regarding Antonin Raymond and his work. I had the opportunity to work with Justin on MoMA, and he told me everything what I missed being and studying back in Prague in the old days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a great knowledge. And this is exactly what I was hoping for. And I was hoping to join you in New York, that I will meet some of you who do have this knowledge, or you yourselves knew Antonin Raymond, and you can educate me about these things. So I'm very grateful. Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Very good. A question in about whether you have insights about how the communist era affected Czech-Japanese relations, and especially in architecture and the aesthetics and politics of space.
Yes, right. So definitely the regime that occupied Czechoslovakia from 1948 majorly impacted on architecture scene. It is fascinating what was happening in the 50s, for example, because there were still many architects active who were modernists, who were very active in the avant-garde or with the avant-garde of the 1920s and 30s. Yet, of course, they were depending more or less or very much under the spell of the Soviet, and they would kind of we have some exciting examples actually. František Sammer is also about like that, trying to find quite an effective solution for housing, but still at least on the surface using the social realist ornamentation or certain look. It's a very interesting mixture. So And through various international meetings, you know, Czechoslovakia was part of some sort of discourse, but of course it was heavily filtered by the position in the Eastern Bloc. With Japan, of course, Japan was politically, diplomatically a tricky location, being especially from the post-war and the occupation under a very close, there was very tight relationship with the States. The presence, the diplomatic presence of Czechoslovakia was there in Tokyo, but it was, as far as I know, really supervised. It was very tricky. The people who were stationed, the diplomats, were quite isolated. So that is also what we talked about in the book, that when they designed the new building for Czechoslovak embassy, especially initially, I think some of it actually didn't get to be realized, but it was designed almost like a little, like many services was there. You know, the idea was that the people will pretty much be there all the time, that they couldn't really leave. So there was swimming pool there was some other facilities. It went quite deep. There were multi-leveled underground space, whatever was there, we don't even know probably. And so that was definitely the way, the design of Czech embassy. Now we still have the building, Czech embassy uses it, the Slovak embassy moved somewhere else, was designed with that kind of quite paranoid, 70s mind. But it is quite a beautiful building. It is one of those, as you know, and I've recently talked about this with Professor Schlapeta, about all these kind of arrays of competitions that the communist regime did for the embassies, different embassies in the world. Some of them are really probably, they belong among the best that was built at the time. Yeah, so Czech embassy maybe it's not the best, but it's a good building. You know, it's a good building for its time.
Thank you.
Yes.
A question came in about photographs that appear on one of your slides. I don't know if you'll be able to back up and find it. There's a photo with a group of 6 officers. Could you point out which one is Raymond?
Sure, that must be probably from the First World War. I can go back. Yes, Raymond looks very proud and happy in that photograph. So. Oh, I think this was probably this one.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. So we have, this is Raymond in the middle. Yeah.
Okay. And who is in the middle photo on this slide?
Yes, this is again Raymond here. So Raymond is here, here, and here. And it illustrates his engagement in the First World War. So this, I believe, is in France with his commander at the time. And these people are all Czechoslovaks from different, again, it wasn't specified. This photo is from the autobiography as well. And you can just see that they have different uniforms because they came from different regions, as you know, as the legionaries were coming from all over the place.
Very good. So sort of a comment and question here for one of our audience members. Japan during the period in question was regarded as insular, as indeed you've indicated. So how did Antonín Raymond penetrate? And I think you've partly answered this question. You say that he was a networker, but was there something more?
Yeah, was there something more? Yes, so I think not only that the timing, the interwar period was this period when in Japan there was a very energetic foreign network. As I said, many of Raymond's contemporaries, architects, would pretty much only build for this foreign network. These were missionaries, for example. Missionaries were very active. They would be running schools, hospitals, all these kind of public welfare type of institutions, and they wanted that. I've done quite a lot of work on a project of St. Luke's International Hospital that is still in Tokyo. It's a very respected a hospital actually for cancer research, I believe. And Raymond designed it, although the building, the old building it's called now, that is there now, it's not entirely his design. It's very complex, the project. But what we see very clearly is that, of course, the missionaries have had very clear agenda, not only in terms of what they were doing in Japan and in terms of faith, of course, spreading, and but also charitable work. Yeah, charitable work. But also they wanted their buildings to be iconic. They wanted them to present as something foreign and something beautiful. So there was an agenda in the design as well. And Raymond was sometimes successful with getting that he needs to also demonstrate this message, and sometimes not so much. And with the St. Luke's, there was a big problem with the chapel that Antonín Raymond was designing, this very simple, kind of elegant, but quite yeah, too simple basically for the missionaries, and they wanted, they wanted that big cross and big statement, and that was one of the points where it didn't go so well. So yes, so he was covering all that. He was also having these Japanese clients, but I would add one thing, that also what really worked for him was time. He was there long enough, and when you do, those of you who do work with Japanese or have maybe Japanese friends, that with the Japanese everything is a long run. Nothing happens very fast. If it is a project or something significant, it takes time. The time tests you. At the time will build that confidence in you, the trust, and that when that is cleared, and it takes few years, you get this trust, and you also get commissions. And Raymond indeed was there long term.
So a slightly related question. Did Raymond encounter personal hostility in Japan in the years just prior to the war? And then after the war, how welcome was he when he returned?
Yes, personal hostility. I wouldn't know about any specific examples here. I think it was it took a lot of navigating for him to exactly avoid that and to be successful. With the post-war, that was much more complicated. What I mentioned, the work he did in the Second World War was something that many Japanese still today can't really comprehend. We had a very touching event at one of the talks that was Mr. Kitazawa, because he got this question from the audience, and his response was that, of course, he didn't know Raymond at the time. He was a very young, maybe child, but he almost started crying, and he said, "I can't understand. If I was to respond to you, I can't understand how somebody who loved Japan so much could do something like that." So it's very hard.
Complicated part of his story, for sure. Well, we've made our our guest work pretty hard, so I would like to give her a rest soon. Are there any more questions? I see one maybe just came in on the chat here. I think we spoke about this a little on Monday. So is Raymond considered a founder of Japanese modern architecture among scholars?
Yes. I will respond, but let me just give me a second. I think I need to plug in my computer so that it doesn't die. Yes, so just give me a moment. Maybe Chris, you can share something and I will respond.
I wish I had some relevant expertise on Japanese modern architecture, but I think I'm going to leave that to the experts today.
Well, I'm asking because I've heard that, you know, so many times, so I would like to hear it from the expert.
Okay, well, I mean, not to give anything away, but Dr. Čapková gave us a very nicely nuanced response to that question on Monday, so you'll get to hear that.
Yes, so I hope I made the adjustments. Yes, so this is indeed a very tricky question, and you are absolutely right that it keeps coming up that Antonin Raymond is the father of Japanese modern architecture. I think it is a complicated issue because there would be arguments that would confirm it in a sense that how prolific he was, therefore what kind of impact he has had. Definitely, if we asked architects, especially younger or very young architects today here in Japan, they really admire Raymond's style, Raymond architecture. He's quite prolific. But I think to claim that he was the father of modern architecture is going a little bit too far. I think if he was to be as such, he would have to build much stronger sort of, not quite network, but sort of very tight following of pupils or students. Maybe it would work if he had been a part of education network, which little bit later, I think what we can say is that Tange Kenzo is somebody like that. You know, Tange definitely very boldly created this, direction, or he pointed to direction to which modern Japanese architecture will go. He was teaching. He built this huge following of students, and he created some kind of clan, and as such he's that kind of figure. But Raymond, for many reasons, of course, maybe language was one of them, and as I try to say today, he really achieved a great deal. I think it's absolutely extraordinary how well he incorporated himself. So, achieving in the 20s or 30s, or even post-war, that he would become that kind of professorial figure as well, being active with one of the architecture school, that would be really maybe asking too much of him. It would be amazing. So I would say, I wouldn't call him that, but I would definitely say that he was extremely important, one of the even founding figures of Japanese modern architecture, for sure.
Thank you.
Since you came around to this question of education, maybe I'll just ask this one question that I had during your presentation. If I understand correctly, he left Prague without having completed his studies at the Technical University. Did he ever at any point actually earn an academic title or a degree in architecture?
I don't think so, no, but I mean, I think it wasn't absolutely necessary for the time. You still had, right, this kind of apprenticeship system. Many architects did get their trainings through working closely with some important architect. So it wasn't uncommon, and I'm sure Antonin Raymond definitely considered himself as a perfectly trained and capable because of all his experiences that he had, and then of course he set up his own company, so he was his own boss.
The body of work is clearly there, but it's an interesting aspect of his complicated life story.
Yes.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so maybe this is a good time to wrap up. It has been a long stretch. Thank you so much, Helena, for this fascinating talk into a great figure who I'm sure was very interesting to most of our audience. And I'm so glad that you have connected with at least one other person who will help you expand the scope of your work. So again, thank you to our audience for joining us.